Everyone could take a seat, please. Thank you very much for joining us in person tonight. And we also have a group of people that will be watching us on our Facebook. I'd like to begin by inviting to the podium Monsignor Gerald Friedel, the rector of the Mary Seat of Wisdom Chapel, and the current holder of the Wilbur and Ellen Hackman Ziegler Endowed Chair. Monsignor Friedel?
Let us pray. Creator God, each and every entity you have made, from smallest to greatest, proclaims your glory. We humans, whose minds can grasp that reality, are nonetheless often so weak in our imagining that we seek to bind you, who are unlimited, within the confines of our notions about your nature. We invoke those cramped ideas to justify rejecting anyone who sees you differently, who worships you in a fashion other than our own. We refuse to welcome one another and excuse ourselves in the name of these gods of our own making. We neglect the infinite height by which you transcend our poor intellects to squeeze your majesty into our pitiful idols. Open wide our minds, we beg you. Purify our hearts of these attitudes so unworthy of you, so that we might learn to respect the sincerity with which each person strives to know and worship you. Give us the courage to treat each other in the exercise of our religious freedom with compassion and consideration. Strengthen in us the desire to dwell together in peace, so that our diverse voices might resound in a beautiful polyphonic chorus to your honor and glory forever. Amen.
Now we will have welcoming remarks from the president of Thomas More University, Dr. Joseph Schiller.
Thank you, Bray. It's great to see everyone here gathered for such a wonderful event. It is my great pleasure to welcome our friends, our guests, and members of our community to the William T. Robinson III Institute for Religious Liberty Centennial Interfaith Fall Event. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guest speakers this evening, David Harris, and to our commentators, welcome back, Dr. James Buchanan and Shakila Ahmad. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome His Excellency Bishop John Ifford. Bishop Ifford serves as the 11th Bishop of Covington and as the new Chancellor of Thomas More University. We're delighted to have him here this evening. And to our friends who are joining us through Facebook Live, welcome all to Thomas More University's Mary Seat of Wisdom Chapel. Thomas More is the Catholic University of the Diocese of Covington, serving more than 2,000 students from northern Kentucky to around the world. As we celebrate our centennial this year, it gives us reason to pause and to celebrate our history and tradition, and to attest to the benefits of a strong Catholic liberal arts education. The ability to think critically, to be effective communicators, to be ethical and servant leaders, and to have a positive impact upon others in our communities are hallmarks of a Thomas More education and our students and alumni who continue to exemplify our mission and values. Inspired by the Catholic intellectual tradition and by our patron, St. Thomas More, we challenge students of all faiths to examine the ultimate meaning of life, their place in the world, and their responsibility to others. Since its founding as Willamette College in 1921, the university has grown and today plays a key role in the success of Northern Kentucky and the greater Cincinnati region. The university's new strategic plan, Lighting the Way, lays out an ambitious plan and roadmap that positions the university strategically as we begin our second century. As the oldest higher education institution in Northern Kentucky, we take great pride in our history and the significance that Willamette College, Thomas More College, and today, Thomas More University has had in the development of Northern Kentucky and the many lives that our institution has shaped and touched over its 100 years, and the role that we continue to play in shaping the future of Catholic higher education. Looking ahead, it gives us great excitement to recognize our past and legacy, but more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to forge our future and destiny as a premier Catholic liberal arts university. We are fortunate through the generosity of Bill Robinson and his wife Joan, who's in attendance here today, and who also serves on our board of trustees at the university, to have established the William T. Robinson III Institute for Religious Liberty at Thomas More University. Thank you, Joan. Established in 2015, the mission of the Institute is to advance the American concept of religious freedom as an inalienable right and the protection of that right for all people, which is essential to our democratic values. Since 2015, the Institute has sought to bring dynamic and distinguished scholars to our campus to engage in conversations that are timely and relevant. The William T. Robinson III Institute for Religious Liberty exemplifies the very best of a liberal arts education and the importance of understanding the differences that make up our world and our communities. And these differences should unite us rather than divide us in the pursuit of truth as an enduring quality of the values that we hold dear. And certainly the challenge that we're facing today as a society, as a community, requires us to maintain our religious freedom as these rights and the pursuit of truth that must endure. Here at Thomas More, as our mission states, we challenge students of all faiths to examine the ultimate meaning of life, their place in the world, and their responsibilities to others. The university's mission is timely, relevant, and compelling. At the forefront of the institution's work and vision is Dr. Ray Hebert, Executive Director of the Institute, and the Executive Committee who works closely with Dr. Hebert, whom I'd like to thank all of you in attendance here tonight, and thank you, Ray, for your outstanding service to the university in this work. This evening's interfaith event, A Frontline Perspective from a Lifelong Jewish Activist, brings together three distinguished scholars and individuals who embody the values and the significance of religious freedom. The strength of Thomas More University and our commitment as a Catholic liberal arts institution is evident this evening, and I thank our distinguished scholars in sharing their scholarship, their work, their experiences, and their passion with all of us tonight. I hope all of you enjoy this evening's presentation and conversation. Again, thank you for joining us, and welcome to Thomas More University's Centennial Interfaith Fall event.
Now, my primary role will be to introduce the three speakers, and then they're going to do something very unique tonight. They've agreed that there is a series of 6 questions. 3 will be asked by each of the commentators to our primary speaker, and as he answers those, the comments will be interspersed as needed as they move along. So I will introduce the 3 speakers, mention the 6 questions, and then we'll leave it to them to take it from there and take us through the evening. Begin with, we're very blessed to have David Harris here with us this evening. David is the CEO of the American Jewish Committee. He has been in that position since 1990. He has been recently praised by the New York Times for having the organization that is one of the leading organizations in the entire country as far as Jewish organizations. He He is called the Foreign Minister of the Jewish People by former President of Israel, Shimon Peres. In his 30-plus years, he's been honored more than 20 times by foreign governments for his international work, making him the most decorated American Jewish organizational leader in United States history. Academically, he has ties to the University of Pennsylvania for his bachelor's, London School of Economics, has been a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University and Oxford University. His master's and Ph.D. are both from the London School of Economics. He is a married father of 3 who meets with world leaders routinely to advance Israel's diplomatic standing and promote international human rights and interreligious and interethnic understanding. Shakila Ahmad from the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati has been the board chair and president of the Islamic Center, is a member of the executive committee for the IRL here at Thomas More, and we are thrilled to have her in that role. She was the first woman to serve in the capacity as president of the Islamic Center at such an institution in the United States. She's the founding chair of ICGC's Muslim Mothers Against Violence Initiative and the Greater Cincinnati Interfaith Circles. She's been recognized regularly for building bridges in a troubled world. She currently serves on the IAJC's Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, made up of leaders across the country whose goals include strengthening state and federal legislation against hate crimes and promoting the contributions of Jewish and Muslim Americans. Dr. James Buchanan, the former director of the renowned Brueggeman Center for Dialogue at Xavier University, whom we are proud to be partnering with, studied comparative religions and ethics at Yale and the University of Chicago, has studied and taught in Paris, Moscow, Beijing, and Hong Kong, formerly held the Best Family Chair and Professorship in Ethics and Religion and Society at Xavier, and the Carolyn Werner Gannett Chair in Humanities at the Rochester Institute of Technology before that. He has lectured and is still lecturing worldwide and published widely in a wide range of global ethical matters. He has played a major role in Greater Cincinnati, as has Shakila, with what is sometimes known as the Festival of Faiths. I leave that now to the 3 of them, and I believe you want to just
say I will begin.
yeah, why don't you go ahead, Jim?
First of all, let me thank you, Ray, for the invitation to be here, and Thomas More for this event. I was fortunate enough to have been invited, I guess was the last year, the last time this was done, and to give the lecture at this. Unfortunately, didn't get to do it live, so as many of the lectures that we've all been doing recently, you get to do a lecture and stare at your own face in a computer screen, which is always just not only disconcerting, but you always begin to think, how is my hair? What's going on with this? But welcome, David, to Cincinnati. Let me begin. As someone who's been involved in activism of various types throughout my whole life, I always think it's interesting to have a biographical note. What led you down this path? How did this start for you? And then I want to follow up on that after you do this. Was it an event? Was it a series of events? What led you down this path?
Well, before I begin speaking, as they say, let me say a few words. I'm very moved to be here tonight, particularly for the symbolism of this dais and the way in which this program has been organized. And I really want to thank the university, not just for inviting me, but for conceptualizing conceptualizing this kind of conversation, and also congratulate the university, as we Jews say, Mazel Tov, on your centenary. And as we Jews say again, and may you go from strength to strength at Thomas More University. Welcome to you, Bishop. I gather you're still a newbie, your first month, and I want to thank you, Gary Zola, who's a professor at the Hebrew Union College across the river, for being, to use a Yiddish word, the shochin, the matchmaker. And if you remember Fiddler on the Roof, the matchmaker, make me a match. Well, he was the matchmaker right here between Thomas More University and myself. Several of my AJC colleagues are here, Kathy Heldman and Melanie Pell and Jillian Laskowitz. And last but not least, there is a connection among the three of us, which I'm proud to say that the American Jewish Committee forged. As you heard from Ed, Shakila is a member of our Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, which is both a national and a regional operation, and we hope will continue to expand. And James, if I'm not mistaken, you traveled with us to Israel for the Christian Leadership Initiative, which is another one of our interfaith programs that we're so proud of. So that's the before I speak part. The answer, James, it's actually very personal for me. It was less an event, though there were a couple along the way, and frankly, it was my family experience. I'm the first member of my entire extended family born in the United States. Both of my parents are survivors of the Holocaust. In the case of my mother, she was a refugee first from the Soviet Union and Soviet communism, found refuge in France, lived quietly for 11 years, studying until the Nazis occupied France in 1940 and were again hunting for Jews. And my mother and her family fled, hid, and eventually escaped. My father was a refugee from Austria after the 1938 Anschluss, which was the German occupation of Austria. My father was expelled from the university, where, as I later learned, he was studying something I can barely pronounce, the synthesis of the heavy hydrogen atom, something he began at the university at the age of 16. 2 years later, was expelled, escaped, and then had a very long war story, including imprisonment, escape, and ultimately ended the war with OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime spy agency of the United States, which led him to be parachuted behind enemy lines the last 2 years of the war. And the then formidable head of the OSS, Colonel Wild, who was named Wild Bill Donovan, William Donovan, brought him to the United States to help create the CIA, which was founded through the OSS. I mention this story because even though my parents rarely talked about these issues, many Holocaust families rarely spoke about these until much later in life. I grasped that there was something different about my family. And when other children were talking about the camps that their parents went to, camps like Hiawatha or Pocahontas, the only camps that I knew were camps called Dachau and Treblinka. And I couldn't quite reconcile the Native American names with seemingly foreign names and very different experiences with no camp songs. So in a way, James, without necessarily realizing it, I was sort of drawn into this world and tried to answer a fundamental question. Why did bad things happen to good people? And why in particular were Jews targeted, and not for the first time? European soil had been fertilized by anti-Semitism for centuries, which made it far easier for Nazi Germany and its collaborators to pursue the Jews, to a large degree with tragic success. 6 of 9 million European Jews were slaughtered. My parents were among the lucky ones. And so I don't want to make it sound too cliched, but I realized as I grew older that I wanted to try and help make sure that, number one, their memory was honored, and number two, that nothing like this ever happened again. And that led me to the American Jewish Committee, and now 42 years later, I'm happy to say that I think I'm off probation.
Let me just do a brief follow-up. Having been involved in various forms of activism throughout my life as well, for at least as many years as that as well, I've seen not only issues change, but I've seen the forms that activism take change. What's your experience with that in terms of the way in which your activism, the paths it has taken, and how that has changed? And then finally, how would you like to see it change? What would you like to see go on as we move forward?
Well, I cut my teeth as an activist in 1974. So the triggering event, back to your earlier question, for me was a plea that we heard. There was no social media at the time, so it came in other forms. And it was really 3 words in Hebrew, Shalach et Ami. In Russian, because it came from Russian speakers behind the Iron Curtain, Atpustin narod moy. And in English, it's translated in the 4 words most associated with the story of Moses and the Jews in Egypt, let my people go. It was the story of literally millions of Jews trapped behind the Iron Curtain, just a few years after the Holocaust. And though there were no death camps in the spirit of the Nazi death camps, the Soviet policy was a policy of cultural genocide to extinguish every last vestige of Jewish life. And by the way, I would add, even though the Jewish situation was quite particular, essentially every last vestige of authentic religious life in the Soviet Union. I stress the word authentic because there was an inauthentic religion practiced as a kind of Potemkin village, as a kind of show religion. But I think as many in this audience know, the official policy of the Soviet Union was a policy of state atheism. And therefore, the holy, the divine, the faithful were seen as enemies. And it was interesting in the Gulag, the Soviet version of the prison system, how many believers met each other across faith lines. Ukrainian Catholics and Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox and Jews, and there were some Pentecostals and others as well. So I learned activism the old-fashioned way, James, and that was you go into the streets, you stand in front of the Soviet embassy, you protest, you petition, and you try and twin young Jewish children here in the United States with Jewish children in the Soviet Union to create a human relationship. You try and travel to the Soviet Union and prepare others to travel and to smuggle whatever they can. Religious artifacts, Star of David, Shabbat candles, a Hanukkah menorah, whatever you thought you might be able to put into your suitcase that wouldn't be found by the Soviet customs authorities. And in December 1974, after being in the Soviet Union for several months on a US-Soviet teachers exchange, during which I met many Jews, I was arrested and held for 3 days and 2 nights under house arrest, and then I was put on a plane to Helsinki, Finland. And that, James, if anything, was the sort of final straw, because I realized that my parents' story was not just a story of the past, because at the end of the day, it's obviously extraordinarily important to protect the memory of the past, but as I said in many Holocaust commemorations, if people are really serious about learning the lessons of the Holocaust or the Shoah, as we say in Hebrew, don't just mourn dead Jews, work with living Jews. The ultimate test of understanding is not to bring back what is not bring backable. Protect their memory, preserve their memory, learn the lessons, but ultimately, it's about living Jews. And so I arrived in Helsinki, Finland in the middle of winter. Any of you who've been to Finland and your world travel, James, knows that there are probably 2 hours of light in Finland in December. But I have to tell you, after months in the Soviet Union, the gray, dismal Soviet Union, I remember my arrival in Finland as the brightest sunniest day of my life. It was probably 30 degrees below zero. You could barely see the sun. But I was on fire. If the Soviets had wanted to intimidate me and silence me, they did the exact opposite. And so our activism was based again on pre-social media. What's really different today is technology. I asked myself, James, if we had had the tools of social media in the 1970s, how much more effective might we have been at conveying messages, organizing people, engaging with legislators and others. So we did it the old-fashioned way. By the way, I just want to say one more thing, because we're here in this place of worship. That one of the key elements of that activism, which to me is as important today as then, was what we at AJC refer to as the Interreligious Task Force on Soviet Jewry, which was led by Sister Ann Gillen and Sister Rose Ferry, both, as we say in the Jewish tradition, of blessed memory. Father Robert Dryman, who subsequently served in the House of Representatives. We could not have sustained our campaign as Jews alone without enlisting the full-throated support of people of other faiths, and in this case particularly of the Catholic faith, who showed up at every protest, at every international gathering. When we went to Reykjavik for the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in order to assert the rights of Jews in the Soviet Union, people like Sister Rose and Sister Ann were by our side, and it was a very powerful, compelling message to tell the Soviets, if you think it's about Jews, it's about fundamental human rights and religious liberty, and it affects us all as one. Okay.
So, I want to, first of all, thank you, Ray, President Shillo, for your gracious invitation. And I'm truly humbled to be between two actual scholars. I do not refer to myself as a scholar, but an humble educator that is passionate about the work that I do. So it's truly an honor to be here. I do want to acknowledge the constituency from the country called Ohio that came all the way from up north as far as Mason and beyond to be here. So thank you to all of them and all of the friends that I see, and very much the matchmaker Gary Zola, who is very dear and a very respected colleague as well. So it is. I have met David before, and it's been really a humbling experience to see the immense work that the American Jewish community has done on behalf of the Muslim Jewry. But the question that I have for David is, among the many different Jewish organizations, and some of them well represented in Cincinnati and in the greater tri-state region, you've been at the AJC since 1979, and before becoming CEO in 1990, it's not very common to be at one company, so to speak, for so long. So why AJC? And I'll just ask my follow-up is that, and how have you seen it evolve? And, what are your thoughts on why you came, the stay, and then where you are
He stayed because he couldn't get another job. But they're not here, so. So I'll try and offer a different answer. I grew up not knowing about the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations. My parents were not involved in Jewish organizations. They were too busy figuring out America and learning English through their son, and trying to navigate jobs and all the other survival issues of any newcomer, and dealing with some of their lingering trauma. So it was all new to me, Shakila. But I met it, before coming to AJC, there was this span of 4 years, from 1975 when I came out of the Soviet Union until 1979 when I joined. And I spent most of that time in Rome and Vienna. Now, why Rome and Vienna? Because these were the two arrival points for Jews able to leave the Soviet Union and other communist countries. If they were able to leave, they arrived in Vienna. And then from Vienna, they were transferred to Rome, and they were processed in Rome. And eventually, if they were able to get visas for resettlement in other countries, they then moved. And lots of people came to see us, especially in Vienna. It was a kind of, it was a photo opportunity for many. It was a human drama. People leaving the communist world by the thousands. All ages, all stripes, all stories. I mean, lots of non-Jews mixed in as well, some posing as Jews. By the way, ironically, 30 years after the Second World War, non-Jews posing as Jews, because there was, at least in theory, a way out for some Jews. Whereas 30 years before, it was Jews trying to pose as non-Jews to escape the clutches of the Nazis. So history takes funny twists and turns. But there was one delegation that actually came without a Kodak camera. And I thought they were so earnest and so serious and so thoughtful and so probing. And they were from the American Jewish Committee. And at the end, there was a kind of a typical American throwaway line, come visit. I'm not sure they meant it, but if you're ever in New York, David, come and visit. This was in Vienna. And I came to visit. And they offered me a job, and I accepted the job. And my future wife and I moved to New York, got married, and the rest is history. But what attracted me to AJC is actually very much the spirit of this evening. I won't speak about other organizations. What attracted me to this organization was the fact that the very first Supreme Court case that AJC ever engaged with, shortly after its founding in 1906, as I did my homework, was actually for the right of Catholic parents in the state of Oregon to send their children to parochial schools at a time when the governor of Oregon wanted to deny Catholic parents their right to attend such schools. For the lawyers in the room, this case is often referred to as the Magna Carta of religious liberty in the United States. And I was really intrigued, Shakila, that a Jewish organization, as its very first legal case, would understand, number one, that this was a fundamental question of religious liberty, and number two, that if you want to have friends in the world, you have to learn how to become a friend. So it was both the unselfish and the selfish, but done in a very, to me, uplifting way. I was also struck later on, after the Second World War, again as I did my homework, that AJC was the first and the only Jewish organization in the world that sought to engage with post-war Germany. Now, in my family, like many, you could not mention the word Germany. My father spoke German with his parents, and I barely speak German. My mother spoke Russian with her parents, and I speak fluent Russian. and my parents spoke French with each other because that was the only language they had in common, and I speak French. But my father did not want me to learn German, and frankly, I intuitively understood it. But by the time I was an adult, I understood the extraordinary courage of AJC, not out of any desire to minimize the Nazi crimes, but a recognition that Germany wouldn't just vanish after the war. It was still the most populous and potentially powerful nation in Europe. So how it would emerge was materially important to us as Jews, to us as Americans, and there was AJC out there by itself. And then, bringing it back here to Thomas More, I also learned that when the Second Vatican Council convened and made its momentous decision in 1965, what is known in history as Nostra Aetate, which was a transformational decision of the Catholic Church to explore its own relationship to the Jewish people and, forgive me, the history of anti-Semitism within the church, and to end, for once and for all, the deicide charge against the Jewish people, which had wreaked such tragedy over so many centuries in so many parts of Europe and beyond. And AJC, for 15 years or more, Shakila, working quietly with our Catholic friends, and we had many. In particular, I want to recall the memory of Cardinal Bea, who originally came from Buenos Aires, was central to working with the Catholic Church for this momentous decision. And I will say that as a consequence of that decision, there has been a veritable revolution. I hope you'll agree with me, Bishop. A veritable revolution in the relationship between the Catholic and Jewish peoples in the ensuing years, highlighted by Pope John the 23rd, by John Paul II, right up to this day. And what we now take as a normal engagement between Catholics and Jews as partners, as friends, as allies on so many issues, I need to tell especially the younger people here, was not always the case. This was the organization for me. I hadn't known of its existence, but philosophically, ideologically, spiritually, this was the match. Forward-looking, not paralyzed by history, courageous, willing to go it alone if necessary, balancing the universal with the particular. It had my name all over it. And here we are 42 years later.
Well, you've really taken it many places. And, you know, as a person of the Islamic faith, I can relate to the fact that when you're a very unknown minority, unknown faith, much of your life is dedicated to not just educating others, but being in conversation with others so they begin to understand you. And one of the best ways to do that is for us to be able to speak out for others and to represent others. And I'll just add my, thoughts on your remarks by a short story. I'm part of a women's interfaith group in the northern suburbs of Cincinnati, and there was an email some time ago going about, and my neighbor sent it and he goes, "Is this true?" And I was really distraught, and because it referenced the Quran, it referenced the faith, and it just, everything was so false. And I shared my distress with the wonderful woman, and there's a much older woman who'd seen a lot of the Catholic faith, and she said, "Oh, honey, don't worry about that. When I was young, they were sending letters around with the exact same thing about Catholics." So it's really telling that each of us at different points in our lives and times face very similar circumstances. James?
Thank you. David, obviously, we've seen in recent years a rather shocking rise, both domestically and globally, in anti-Semitism. Where do you think it's coming from? What explains the alarming trend? And then, how do you tie this into the other forms of hate speech and acts that are also on the rise? Racism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Sikhism, everything. Is anti-Semitism part of a new and disturbing global pattern? Or is there something very special about it? And how do we, all of us, who are working in these various venues because of this rise of hate speech and acts, how do we work together? And I want to, for the audience here who may not know about this, here in Cincinnati, 19 different organizations came together after Charlottesville and formed the Cincinnati Regional Coalition Against Hate. And that's a coalition whose mission says this: if there's an act of anti-Semitism, that is not just an act against the Jewish community, it's an act against the whole of this community. If there's an act against the Muslim community, that's an act against all of us. If there's a racist act, that affects all of us regardless of our color. And so we're trying to navigate really tricky waters with all of these organizations coming together. It is now housed, interestingly, in the Holocaust and Humanities Center here in Cincinnati. Just recently we hired a new executive director. So what we're trying to do is to beat back the hate on every front. To say every time it comes up, it's all of our fights. It's the struggle we're with. So how do you see this rise? Because you also have this global perspective on it. And then how do you respond to the way in which we must collaborate? We must begin to work together. And just to say, when I gave my talk here last year, the theme of it was that we need to move beyond simply interfaith dialogue and to move into a new era of interfaith collaboration.
Wow.
Simple question.
It's a simple question without a simple answer. Well, to segue from the last exchange with Shakila, one of the answers, James, perhaps came from John Paul II. When he historically spoke at the main synagogue in Rome. By the way, I have to say, for those of you who've been to Rome, the main synagogue is on the edge of what was the Ghetto of Rome. The Ghetto of Rome was not first established by Nazi Germany. It was established by, if I recall, Pope Pius IV in the 16th century, where Jews were locked in at night. The gates were closed. Jews were not allowed to leave. And in the meantime, you'll still see, by the way, just to the south of the synagogue, Tempio Maggiore, as it's called, a small church. And the Jews of the ghetto were forced into that church, where the attempt was made to convert them. And if you read the placards, you'll see that in response, many of the Jews put wax in their ears in order to shut out the homilies. And the guardians of the church had long poles so they could reach into the pews beyond the aisle, because many of the Jews tried to stay as far from the aisles as they could, so they had long poles to wake up people and try and keep them engaged while also having checked their ears. I mean, here we check masks, there it was ears. That was the backdrop. When Pope John Paul II came to the synagogue, And he said, I'm paraphrasing, "You are our older brothers." I think I got that right. "You are our older brothers." Elder brothers. I think that's part of the answer, James. It's, in that specific case, I'm sure it was because, if I may, there is no Christianity without Judaism. But it also underscored two things, for me at least. And I have a special connection to Italy. My wife and my children are all Italian citizens. Jews, Italian citizens. And I lived part of my life in Italy. But it signaled two things. Number one, it signaled our common humanity. One of the fundamental teachings in Judaism is the concept of B'Tselem Elohim, that every human being is created in the image of God. Not every Jewish human being. Every human being is created in the image of God, which, by the way, explains why in synagogues you will never see religious iconography. Because in the Jewish interpretation, if you seek to depict the image of the divine, you're automatically excluding a major segment of the population. By race, by gender, by appearance, by what have you. But it was, for us, that affirmation of our common humanity and therefore our common destiny that gets to the heart of the answer to your question, James. And the second, which also I think gets to the heart of it, is that it was, for us, the abandonment of what had been called by many Catholic scholars either replacement theology or supersessionist theology, which essentially said that the New Testament replaced the Old Testament, in effect. It superseded it. It didn't make it vanish, but it took religious faith to the next level. So we, the Jews, became the anachronistic part of the story. And I mention it, James, not for historical reasons. Because when religion becomes an instrument for fostering understanding of one another and respect for one another, rather than for the demonization or the desecration of one another and their beliefs, we're one big step forward in the effort to address the answer to your question. Religion, and forgive me, allow me to be provocative, religion, history has shown, can be an extraordinary force for good, uplifting the values of this university, President Chilla, as you described it in your remarks. But it's no secret that religion can also be a force for conflict, for competition, in the worst possible way, for demonization, for destruction, in the name of religion. So one big answer for me, James, to your question is, those of us who are inspired by our own faith, but also understand and respect that others are entitled not just to their faith, but to the defense of their faith, means that all of us in the faith communities are in this together. So, from our perspective, when the message from pulpit, if this is a pulpit for this purpose, when the message is we affirm our own faith here in a Catholic church or in a mosque or in a synagogue, but it's not a triumphalistic faith. It's not a supersessionist faith. It's our faith that gives us the boundaries of our life and the inspiration and the nourishment we need, but at the same time We respect and admire the people in the mosque next door and those in the synagogue there, because we're all at the end of the day on one life journey. And it's a hell of a difficult journey for all of us. And if faith gives us the power to engage with life more creatively and constructively, then God bless faith. But if faith is going to teach me from here that all non-Jews or all non-Muslims or all non-Christians are destined for hell, or have no right to their religion, then faith is being misused and abused, and people of good faith, I believe, have a responsibility to stand together. So, you also asked, maybe I should pause here, James, because you asked about anti-Semitism in particular, and I want to get to that, but I also don't want to go on too long. So shall I pause for a moment?
Well, no, it's fine. I did need to put up just a point on that. And I want to go back to the first answer that you gave to me about the path and activism. And you mentioned their technology, and you said you wondered what role social media could have played when you began. What role do you think social media now is playing on the negative side of this, in fomenting anti-Semitism, in fomenting hate, and bringing people together into new kind of very virulent coalitions that are extremely difficult to fight against because they exist in this ether where there is nobody, and everybody is simultaneously nowhere and everywhere when we're doing this. I mean, how has that changed the game?
Totally. Totally. For all the reasons you mentioned. By the way, I can't help but wonder if Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, had access to social media. I mean, just think about that for a moment. I mean, the damage they did was quite enough. I think that the total death toll of the Second World War in Europe was between 50 and 60 million people. But just imagine with that kind of fiendish cleverness of a Goebbels and access to social media. So we have social media, which is an extraordinarily incredible tool. I get to see my grandchildren more than I otherwise would. I have all the world's knowledge and information at my fingertips. I don't have to make the case to this audience what all the benefits are of social media. They are many and they are extraordinary. But in life we live with contradictions. There are simple contradictions like the fact that I love olive oil, but I couldn't eat an olive if you paid me. We have contradictions and we have bigger contradictions. Social media is a force for good, and social media is a dispenser of evil. And then we have dilemmas. I'm not a legal scholar, but we have dilemmas. Where do First Amendment rights end? Where does corporate social responsibility begin? How do we align these issues? I don't think they're simple. I personally might wish to see all forms of things I don't like, scrubbed from the digital space. But I also understand as an American that it's a very slippery slope. And where does it take you in the end? And how do you balance this? And I would add, in our many trips to Europe and meetings with European leaders, this issue comes up, James, as number one in the question of how to fight anti-Semitism and hate. And their argument is that Silicon Valley is killing us in Europe because of your First Amendment protections. You carry it too far. And remember that a number of these European democracies have laws, for example, which ban Holocaust denial. If I stood up on the streets of a number of European countries and I said, the Holocaust never happened, or Auschwitz is a lie, I just won't get denounced. I'll get taken to court. I can get thrown into jail. And, are those countries any less democratic than America? I don't really think so. But they take a different interpretation, and I think this space is going to be a permanent issue for legal scholars, for anti-hate activists and others. But it's social media that has, if you will, been a kind of launching pad for the ubiquitousness of expressions of hate, anti-Semitism. But I would add, if I may, James, one or two other factors that have changed and that explain what's happening. For us at AJC, number one, the memory of the Holocaust is rapidly vanishing. The survivors, like my mother and father, are gone. There are few that remain. I will carry their voice as long as I have breath within me, but I'm not them. And as much as I know about them, I cannot authentically convey the story the way an Elie Wiesel or Primo Levi, or for that matter, my mother and father could. The liberators, the eyewitnesses, the righteous Gentiles, the Jan Karskis of the world. For those of you who know the Polish Catholic, who remains one of my heroes in life for what he did to try and not just save Jews, but then travel to London and Washington to persuade Anthony Eden and Franklin Roosevelt about the Holocaust and to urge their intervention, and ultimately failed in what he tried to do. They're gone. Secondly, there's no Pfizer vaccine against hatred and anti-Semitism. You know, God bless Pfizer and God bless Moderna. And maybe one day their extraordinary talents will be able to produce a vaccine against what brings us together tonight. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But in the meantime, some of us thought, well, there is kind of a vaccine. And the vaccine is called liberal democracy. Now, I don't mean liberal democracy as opposed to conservative democracy. I'm not talking here about, you know, political polarization in America. I'm talking about fundamental liberal democratic values. The right to worship, the right to one's faith, the principle of mutual respect, the principle of civil discourse. The elements which, whether we think about it or not, define, or we seek to define, our world. Now, maybe liberal democracy is not, if you allow me to reference, the utopia that Thomas More wrote about. Not quite, but it points us in the direction, perhaps, of the concept of utopia, which I think is a concept that he created, the word concept he created. But now there is declining confidence in liberal democracy. I mean, we see it across the liberal democratic world. People losing trust in institutions, people losing trust in each other, the social glue that has kept us together. I mean, think of America for a moment as an idea. Maybe someone would argue it's a flawed idea in practice. But what unites us as Americans conceptually is an idea, nothing more. It's not blood. In Germany, for centuries, it was blood. Here, it was an idea. But the centrifugal forces at work in societies like our own are beginning to pull us apart. Do we still share a common set of ideas? Even if we may act differently on those ideas, that's fine. That's a healthy, robust democracy. So if liberal democracy itself is under challenge, and it's been our best guarantor, then what replaces it? Now, you know and I know that the white supremacist who went to Charleston, South Carolina, and attacked the AME church and killed 9 African American worshipers, they were studying at the time, if I remember correctly, had he not been caught, And had there been a synagogue next door, and a mosque next door to the synagogue, and a Sikh temple next to the mosque, you would have kept going. And you and I know that at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 Jews were killed on Shabbat for the simple act of going to a Shabbat service on October the 27th, an anniversary that's coming up now in, a week. If he could, he would have found the nearest mosque, and he would have found some churches, and he would have continued on his rampage. So James, there is a specificity to anti-Semitism. It shouldn't be diluted. It's a pathology that has existed for literally thousands of years with all kinds of mutations, past and present. That's true. And at the same time, there is a larger context of intolerance and hatred and xenophobia, which are all linked. And if we don't stand together, institutions like this one, churches, synagogues, and mosques that we represent, non-governmental organizations like AJC and its counterparts in other communities, the effort you described in Cincinnati, if we don't stand together, we will fail. Liberal democracy does not have a permanent contract. And if it's our best chance of success, not just survival, but success, we're only one generation away from its potential collapse. I remind us as a final point, Germany was perhaps the most educated nation on the planet in 1933. Bar none. More than 50% of the commandants, of the Einsatzgruppen, the killing groups that followed the Wehrmacht into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, to places like Babi Yar in Ukraine, where 33,771 Jews were killed in less than 48 hours. More than 50% of the commanders had a Ph.D., according to Professor Niall Ferguson of Stanford University. So even when we invoke words like education as the answer, what kind of education? Education writ large? No. It has to be something else. And for me, the education begins, and I don't say this simply because I'm Jewish, with what I believe is the universal concept of B'Tselem Elohim. Unless and until we teach each other convincingly that we are all created in the image of God, every one of us, we're going to keep asking this question, James, generation after generation after generation.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've really delved into the next question quite a bit in regards to, you've made the diagnosis, what should be our response? I think, we have seen in the local region incredible heroic and groundbreaking efforts, whether it was the first Muslim-Jewish dialogue that founded by my mentor and Dr. Malik, who's present today, to, uplifting and using the common word between us document in our work with the Catholic community and the Christian community that I would encourage all to look up to. Before I talk about my engagement with Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, if you could just take a couple of minutes to really talk maybe some specifics in terms of what is the path forward in terms of our engagement, and how is it, in addition to the empathy and the education and truly understanding, we as institutions and organizations can be and should be doing.
Yeah.
Simple question.
Yeah. I think we have to move from conferences to commitment. I think we have to understand that tweets are not the alpha and omega of a response. what I tried to suggest, Shakila, a moment ago was, this is a lifelong battle. This is not a battle that can end anytime soon. When I was younger and in the Soviet Union, I had the conceit of many young people that in my lifetime, we're going to be the ones to solve racism, and we're going to be the ones to solve anti-Semitism, and whatever other dreams we had. And then, on the one hand, lots of progress. I don't want to discourage anyone or sort of diminish the hope. But you kind of also come to understand that this is a relay race. This is not for sprinters alone, individual sprinters. This is a relay race. And the most that each of us can do, I believe, is sprint our fastest and our hardest and our smartest for as long as we can, holding the baton of liberal democratic values, things we're talking about, and having the confidence to know that at the end of my sprint there is someone equally committed and capable who will receive the baton. In my case, that's people like you, Jillian Laskowitz, and you, Melanie Pell, and you, Kathy Heldman. There has to be someone on the receiving end of the baton, because the story of our history, the story of our faith, is a story that doesn't come to the happy ending that Hollywood stories in the 1950s did. Those were the stories that I grew up with. They all had happy endings. It was all figured out at the end, Fred McMurray and my three sons always got it right at the end of the day, and so did Ozzie and Harriet, and so my early lessons were things can end quickly and well. My later lesson was a little messier, not quite so linear. So how do we deal, Shakila, with a problem that is essentially permanent in a very impermanent world where attention spans are short to non-existent in many cases, where people are looking for quick answers, off-the-shelf solutions? It's almost like these sort of advertisements, learn Chinese in a week, or lose 100 pounds in 10 days, or become a millionaire overnight. Our society wants us to believe there are these instant gratification pathways. But we're dealing with human nature in a story that goes back to biblical times and even before. So I know it's not the specific plan. At AJC we have lots of plans. But the bigger issue is sustained commitment. This is a lifelong project. I'll give you one example that gives me enormous hope, Shakila, because it also is in the space between us. Just under 2 years ago, well, actually a little longer than that, AJC and the Muslim World League, which is based in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, signed an MOU. That in itself was groundbreaking. With respect, it's one thing to have relations with our neighbors in Cincinnati or New York, but Mecca, Saudi Arabia was always off limits to us. And the first element of the MOU was that in January of 2020, we and they would travel together to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi German death camp. And we gathered, Jillian, you were there, 62 Muslim leaders from Saudi Arabia and other countries, including, I'd have to say, a number of countries like Saudi Arabia that have no official relations with Israel. traveled to Auschwitz with us. We hosted, and we led for 5 or 6 hours. Why was this so important? It was particularly important for those of you who closely follow events in parts of the Arab world, because in parts of the Arab world, the Holocaust itself is diminished, if not denied. It's sometimes seen as some illegitimate, undocumented event that was concocted by Zionist Jews to justify the creation of the State of Israel, a kind of wave of pity that the world responded to in 1948, 3 years later. So it was especially important for us to go with authentic Muslim leaders from countries like Saudi Arabia, where they had absorbed this kind of narrative perhaps for all their lives. And I still I still have goosebumps thinking about the moment we met just in front of the infamous gate, which many of you have seen pictures of, Arbeit macht frei, the German words, work will set you free. One of the ultimate tragic ironies, work, as if Auschwitz were simply a work site, liberating work site. 1.1 million people were killed, it's estimated, in Auschwitz, of whom close to 1 million were Jews. Among the non-Jews were many Catholic clergy, among others. And I saw, because I walked with Muhammad al-Isa, the head of the Muslim World League, appointed by the King of Saudi Arabia, the custodian of the 2 holy mosques. And we came to a pavilion. I don't know if I can get through the story without emotion. How many of you have been to Auschwitz? 6 or 7 people. I hope you'll have an opportunity at some point in your life. And we stood in front of one of the exhibits, which was of children's shoes that had been collected. Piles of children's shoes. And Dr. Al-Isa just stared. And all of a sudden, he took my left hand. He was standing on my left. And with his right hand, he took my left hand and he started squeezing it. And I could feel the trembling through his arm into my hand. He couldn't let go because he saw in those children's shoes children. And he understood, we talked about it later, the kind of bestiality by humans that would kill children, 6 months old, a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, children his children's age, my grandchildren's ages, for one reason only. They were born Jewish. And then we went to the exhibit of suitcases. The Jews from Vienna and Prague and Budapest and Bucharest and Berlin and Frankfurt and elsewhere who thought they were going to a work camp and who brought their suitcases. And then the next, the eyeglasses. And then the hair. Pounds and pounds and pounds of hair, human hair. And he understood. This was not some Steven Spielberg concoction designed to fool the world into creating some sympathy for the Jews. This was real. And he, as a man of faith, had to understand it. Not just because the targets were principally Jews, but because this was an illustration of man's capacity for inhumanity, an impulse that could be inside many of us, unless we find the ways through faith, through religion, through liberal democracy, through family, to contain it. These were educated people who did the killing. They went home at night. They had dinner with their wives and their children. They played with their children. They sent their children to school the next day. And then they went back to kill other children who would be denied school and denied parents' time and denied toys because they were Jews. He understood it. And we bonded there in a way that I think will seal us together for life. And we wanted to go to Srebrenica. We wanted to see how Muslim men and boys were murdered, thousands, an estimated 9,000, by Slobodan Milosevic, and by his own ethnic cleansing against Muslims in Bosnia-Herzegovina, later in Kosovo. We have to understand each other's fundamental pain and trauma. And through that, create the human empathy that again returns us to the path of what all our faiths teach us as the most noble virtues and values. Because if not, Srebrenica came 40 years after the Shoah. So what exactly do the words never again mean? And if it's not up to us, then who? Who's the other? If it's not up to the Islamic Center of Cincinnati and Xavier University and Thomas More University and the American Jewish Committee and the other institutions represented here, who else is there? And that's my answer.
So each and every one of us, absolutely. And your story is very powerful because you feel the humanity that was recognized. You feel the pain of the other that was recognized. So each of us must remember that, in order for people to understand our pain, it is so important to understand the plight and the pain of other people across the globe, or whether they be our neighbors. I just returned from Sarajevo, so your story,
This was unscripted.
Less than a few weeks, and so, we cannot be at those places. And one of the most powerful experiences I heard was from Imam Majid when he went to Auschwitz. But at the same time,
He was in our delegation.
he was this one as well. And it was really, I want to remind ourselves before I turn it to James, is that, we have an opportunity. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism was fever pitch in 2015, and it was really Kathy Altman and Michelle Young and others who approached me in terms of getting women together for speaking up against, the hate against any one of us. And so it was Catholic women, Jewish women, Sikh women, Muslim women from all throughout the region. And we had to hire a bus from the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati to convene downtown at Fountain Square. And so, we have opportunities, I guess, every day in order to feel each other's humanity and to understand. And sometimes the pain is far away, but I would just ask us to always remember that, we must recognize others' humanity and others' pains.
One of the things that David does is he does regular briefings about what's going on in the world. You can see them on YouTube in the back there. And one of the topics that is thematically runs through many of those briefings is what we would have to refer to as the 800-pound gorilla in every room, which is Israel. And as somebody who's been in Israel a couple of dozen times in my lifetime, and seen stops and starts and what goes on there. And have been there with CLI, I've done work with Shalom Hartman, met with the leaders, I've met with military leaders, and I'm increasingly bleak about it. In fact, one of the terms that I often use in describing it is that it seems intractable. How do you deal with this? It's such a huge issue among Jewry everywhere, but in American Jewry, it's just such a massive topic, and particularly the young Jews that I know have such a difficulty dealing with it. Where do you find hope, and how do we find hope in looking at that situation?
I'm taking off my jacket and rolling up my sleeves because I'm just getting started. So I don't know what your plans are for the evening, but Kathy, I think our next meeting is not till tomorrow morning. So but don't get scared if you need to leave. James, I have to tell you with great respect, I don't share your sense of bleakness. Not at all. Maybe I draw my inspiration from Israel's national anthem, which is called Hatikva. Hatikva means the hope. The words Liot am Chofshi Be'artzeinu, to be a free people in our own land. I derive hope from the hope that Israel was meant to express. I derive hope from the fact that this is a unique journey in the annals of history, I believe. As others have said, there may not be another people on the planet, James, who 3,000 years later speak the same language, practice the same faith, and associate with the same piece of land as this story. Psalm 137. How many years ago was Psalm 137 written? More than a few. A few thousand. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. That's a psalm that was written thousands of years ago. By the way, for those of you of roughly my age, you may have first encountered it as a song, a rock and roll song. Anyone remember who sang it? The Byrds? Anyway, this is quite an extraordinary story, and those people who simply want to reduce it to, you know, Jews are interlopers, crusaders, occupiers, completely fail to understand the scope of the story. Now, I'm not here, James, to defend each and every action of each and every Israeli government any more than I could or would defend each and every action of each and every American government. How could I? Especially given the pendulum swing in this country. But as a Jew, I celebrate Israel's rebirth. I find extraordinary inspiration in Israel's rebirth. And I also, as a practical matter, James, know that had there been an Israeli flag flying in 1938 rather than 1948, potentially millions of Jews in Europe would have been saved when, let's say it bluntly, the vast majority of countries in this world, including this good country, closed its borders to Jews. Canada, the United States, Australia, the bulk of Latin American countries, the bulk of neutral countries in Europe, largely closed their gates to Jews like my parents who were trapped. Had Israel existed in 1938, James, the story could have been different. But there's more reason for hope. Today, there are 6 Arab countries at peace with Israel. We're patient people. It's a wonderful word in Hebrew, sablanut, patience. We waited a few thousand years. We're still waiting for the Mashiach, our Mashiach. Even as he tarries, as we say in our liturgy. 6 Arab countries: Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and I would add 2 or 3 Arab countries that are not quite at that threshold, but are fully engaged with Israel and figuring out their own timing about when to come forward. And you know why? Not necessarily because they've suddenly overnight become card-carrying AJC members, but because they hear the Minister of Economy of the UAE, who said the other day, you may have seen it, we expect bilateral trade and commerce between Israel and the UAE alone in the next decade to reach $1 trillion with a T. With a T. What are they missing out on? You know what that trade includes? It includes trade like Israeli water management techniques. It was earlier predicted, James, that Israel would run out of water and its people could not survive. It would not be able to feed itself as its population grew. Israel today is a net exporter of water, and it still has the same arid climate that it did in 1948. If anything, the climate's worse because of climate change for all of us. It's exporting water. It's taking water out of the air. And Arab countries and others want access to that kind of knowledge because war could one day become a reason for war in the 21st century. How about food production? How about public health? How about cybersecurity, national resilience? There's a lot that Israel has to offer. And these endless cycles of war have brought what? Misery. So I believe that the 6 will become 7 and will become 8. And I believe that one day there will be a resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli issue. I'm not normally Pollyannish. I'm not sort of giving in to the happy Hollywood endings that I was raised with. That would be nice. But Anwar Sadat, bless his memory, understood by 1977 that what was more important was building Egypt's future than trying to destroy Israel's. And he made a historic decision. And then came King Hussein, and now the 4 others. And meanwhile, we hear all this talk about Israel engaged with other Arab countries, named or unnamed. And the Palestinians and the Israelis are destined to live west of the Jordan River. You can change many things in life, you can't change geography. Neither is going away. And one day there will be enough common sense to understand that no, I will never get all that I want and think is my right, but I gotta compromise. Because a half a loaf is better than no loaf on both sides. So, James, with great respect, I'm not succumbing to bleakness. And if we don't fully succeed, then the peacemaking baton is being handed as well. Keep going. Team AJC, keep going.
Obviously, this is one we could go on for days, but thank you very much. We want to allow some time for questions from the audience.
And I really do appreciate your optimism. I think for that optimism to permeate, I think I want to go back that we have to recognize the pain and suffering of every people, and that the resolutions need to keep those in mind. And I pray that that is what happens, because I just want to share an article I just read today that MGAG and MGAGE and MPAC did a survey of Muslims, and very much top 4 on their minds were the Palestinian, the Uyghurs in China, and the Rohingyas in Burma. and the humanity of those individuals. At the same time, they're really concerned about addressing the plight of Muslim majority countries, of minorities and civilians, in particular countries such as Syria. So that humanity must be recognized in all aspects of those conflicts that we're dealing with. And in order for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate violence to not permeate and rule our lives, I just want you to maybe take a few minutes to I know you're very interested in drawing lessons from history and how it is that we could learn in order to really recognize, everyone's humanity and move towards the peace and coexistence that I think this institution and you've just expressed are very much believers of.
Well, allow me to be a bit provocative.
It's your mic.
I'm a guest. You mentioned the Rohingya. As we meet, there are, perhaps 1 million Rohingya who've been expelled from Myanmar, and not necessarily all hospitably welcomed in neighboring countries. Well, let's go further. 1 million or more Uyghurs that we're told in language that is chillingly evocative of an earlier era are being placed in camps for re-education purposes. That doesn't sound like Camp Hiawatha to me, or whatever the fun summer camps might be called in this part of the country. So where are we? And I have to add, Shakila, the majority of Muslim countries are absolutely silent about the Uyghurs. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. They are absolutely silent. How do we know? Because we spend our time at AJC in the United Nations, in the United Nations Human Rights Council, in the Third Committee, in those places where diplomats and politicians meet and engage in lots of talk, more talk than action sometimes, and also too often engage in a kind of glaring examples of total hypocrisy. So I don't doubt the surveys, but I doubt the commitment of their leaders in the countries, because look up close. Where are the Muslim majority countries that should be leading the effort in the United Nations and in the United Nations Human Rights Council and on social media and in the streets and in front of the Chinese embassy in Washington? Where are they? Well, the answer too often is, and this is one of the lessons of history, that they're too busy placating China because they have other fish to fry with China. They want contracts, they want deals, they want votes, they want whatever it is they want. So when values, in this case, the value of human life, gets sacrificed on the altar of political expediency, then who's left to speak? So, we Jews have heard the words never again, and we want to believe. But as we speak, we are told, and we have engaged with the World Uyghur Congress, we have been told that some Muslims are being sterilized. Again, I can't verify but we're being told women are being sterilized. Why? So they cannot have Muslim children? They're being re-educated? We know what that means. An attempt to deny them their faith and their religion through threat, intimidation, torture, imprisonment, what? So where are we? And to say, the lesson I learned, the central lesson was in our taking on the Soviet Union. Now one can argue the Soviet Union is not China. No, it's not. China is a much more formidable challenge, even than the Soviet Union was. But who knew that in the 70s? In the 70s, it looked pretty formidable. And for those of you who are willing to admit that you're my age, you might remember a day in the fall of 1962. I remember taking the public bus in New York City where I lived, going to school. I was 13 years old, and I authentically believed it was my last day on earth, that there was going to be a nuclear war between Moscow and Washington over Cuba. And now I have to laugh because we had all these civil defense preparations. And the civil defense preparations in our school for nuclear war, where they took us all to the gym and they told us to face the wall. And that was somehow going to save us. You know, we, Sister Ann Gillen and Sister Rose Thering and Father Robert Drinan and we, AJC, and others who were involved in the Soviet Jewry struggle were seen as a pain in the tush by an awful lot of politicians in Washington, in London, and elsewhere. You're getting in the way. We have bigger issues to deal with. We have to manage conflicts. We have to manage competition. And don't insert yourselves. Leave it to us. And we said, hell no. We're not leaving it to you. And we're going to continue to be that pain in the tush. In Yiddish we say tuchus, but it refers to tush. Backside. You know what? John Lewis, the late congressman, said there's such a thing as good trouble. Good trouble. The central lesson I learned from my history is, damn it, make good trouble. Trying to save human lives is good trouble. Trying to defend people's right to their own faith is good trouble. Standing up to the bullies is good trouble. It's not always pleasant. It's not always easy. It doesn't bring instant gratification necessarily. But you know what? When I was detained in 1974, I could never have imagined that 17 years later, there would be no more Soviet Union. One of the favorite words in my vocabulary today is the word former in front of the word Soviet Union. Former Soviet Union. Bывший Советский Союз. And I would never have imagined in a country in which the word emigration did not exist. Don't think America or Canada. The word emigracja did not exist in the Soviet vocabulary. And close to 2 million Jews left. They left the workers' paradise. So why am I hopeful, James? Because I've seen hope realized. What's the tactic, Shakila? It's good trouble. It's standing up to the bullies. And it's not allowing political expediency to displace human lives and human dignity as the central purpose of our mission in lives. But you pay a price. The price could be detention or arrest. The price could be cancellation of contracts between countries. The price can be, no, we won't vote for your candidate for Secretary General of the UN or the World Health Organization. But you know what? To heck with it. If I have to choose, I'll choose human lives. That's the central lesson of my history.
Maybe I'll choose life. And I want to clarify, the survey that I was talking about is of Muslim Americans, so it wasn't a global survey. So
Sorry, I didn't
no,
understand.
that's
But you still allow me to make a point, which is step up the game on human weakness.
and everyone absolutely need to
Step it up.
for each other. So I
Keep it
think
up.
we're short on time,
Okay,
and so our
I think we're out of
host,
time.
our host is going to convene some questions.
Okay, we have two in the back that are going to be collecting a couple of questions. Maybe we can have two before we finish. But while we're collecting a few, if you have any, raise your hand and they'll get a piece of paper to you so you can write a question. I have one that I would like to ask David to think about. In reading the AJC materials, I saw your reference to a quote, which has always been one of my favorites, by John F. Kennedy. It goes like this: too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. How relevant is it to recent spikes in anti-Semitism and anti-Asian hate?
That's actually the quote on my Twitter account. That's how much I value that quote. Here's my big concern, the reason why I thought that was, for me at least, the right quote. I believe that too many people in our country have stopped thinking. They've outsourced their thinking. And this is one of the challenges of any great university. We now, increasingly as a nation, I believe, are living in our own intellectual gated communities. It's no longer just the geographic gated communities in wherever it may be, with a guard in the front because we want to live with people like ourselves, whatever, same age or same level of golf or whatever unites them. We're living in intellectually gated communities. We've stopped thinking for ourselves. So we're letting, take your pick, we're letting Rachel Maddow think for us. We're letting Tucker Carlson think for us. We're letting Chris Cuomo think for us. We're letting Sean Hannity think for us. We're letting right-wing newspapers think for us. We're letting left-wing newspapers think for us. We're putting on a kind of intellectual uniform every day that says, I am a proud fill-in-the-blank, progressive, liberal, conservative, populist, whatever it may be. And we are then living within the space created within that larger, vast digital place, and we're not moving from it. And I believe that it's a larger question even than you asked. I believe that the implications for America, forget the rest of the world, are absolutely frightening. Frightening. I spent many years as a debater. If I could construct my own high school, I would make debating obligatory. Not a after-school club competing with a glee club or soccer or baseball. I'd make it obligatory. Because one of the things that I learned from debating was there's a resolution, and sometimes you're asked to debate for, and sometimes you're assigned to debate against. You don't always get to choose. And you do your research, and you discover that on a heck of a lot of issues, which you thought were really black and white, cut and dry, oh my gosh, there actually could be more than one reasonable point of view. I may or may not, at the end of the day, agree with it, but it's not unreasonable. It's not cockamamie. And the more I discovered it, on the one hand, the more confused I became, because what I thought were my own positions on issues were no longer, because, gee, pick the issue. But also, the more I understood, we need more such conversations. We need more people meeting one another in the middle and listening to each other, not by shouting at each other, but by inviting each other into our living room, so to speak. I mean, when I grew up, Gary, you'll remember this. You know, we used to watch the news. Usually it was a half hour in the evenings, it was the national news. Local news was all, you know, blood and sirens and weather and sports. But you had people like Walter Cronkite, and Eric Severide, and Huntley and Brinkley, names that the older people here will know, but not the others. But you know, I remember my parents debating between them, are these guys liberals, are they conservatives, how do we think they vote? And most people never knew. They presented the news as best they could, but without asking you to believe what they believed. You can't watch 5 minutes of Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson without knowing what they believe. And the very fact that you're watching them probably predisposes you to want to believe what they say, whether it's accurate or not. I'm not judging, but they can't both be accurate because they're polar opposite sides of any issue. So at our dinner table, when the news was over, as I got older, you know, I could join the conversation. Well, gee, that Vietnam War that they presented, let's talk some more about it. Is it right that we're there? Is it wrong that we're there? That's partially gone, I think. I would bring back debating. I would try and establish rules of civility. I'm scared to death, Mr. President, of those universities that have shut down open discussion and debate. When I went to Penn, maybe it was just being provocative, they invited every lunatic on the planet to come and speak. If anyone went to Penn, there was Irvine Auditorium, which was the big meeting place. You had Don Birch Society, and you had Black Panthers, and I think there was even at one point a neo-Nazi. And there weren't social workers scattered around the room to help us children cope with what we were hearing. First of all, we didn't have to go. But secondly, what they were really trying to do, I now understand it, was tell us, in the real world, there are lots of people with lots of ideas, some good and some strange, but if you try and hide yourself from them, or shut them down, or keep them out, what do we end up becoming? I'm going to end up living in a geographic, intellectual, political, gated community. And what happens then to the social glue of America? It's scary. It's very scary.
We have a question for you, David. During your 30 years of AJC, what was the most difficult experience you had to face, and how did you overcome it?
I have to think about that one. I haven't been. You have another question?
I do.
I'll come.
This one can
I won't duck
go
it.
to any of the three.
Julia, give me help.
How do you confront people of your own faith if they use religion as an excuse to spread hate and violence?
Let me take the second one first, and buy time on the first one. I don't go out looking for fights, but I think when core principles and values are violated, I think we have to stand up and we have to speak out. So I'll give you an example. It's a very painful example. 1995, Yigal Amir was his name. He assassinated the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. He was a product of Jewish education. Not my Jewish education, but he was the product of Jewish education. He was the product of a belief system which had the stamp Jewish on it. I could not disown him. I could not say he's not Jewish. He was. And we had to confront the ecosystem that allowed a Jew of faith, in this case, a product of a structure. What went wrong? And I think, frankly speaking, that each of our religions confronts the same thing. We, AJC, we were 3 miles from the World Trade Center. I can't hide the fact that Yigal Amir was a Jew and acting in what he believed was the best interest of Jewish faith. And I'm obviously not a Muslim, but if I were, I believe I would apply the same principle. It's too easy and simplistic to say, by definition, they are not Jews or they are not Muslims, because they violate the core commandments of our faith. But whoa, slow down. Slow down. They believed they were acting in the name of the faith. That it was a twisted, demented interpretation. It may well be true, but it cannot obscure the fact that it happened in the name of faith. And I think what is required, and I've already made several references to the Christian community and to issues within the Christian community and the Catholic Church historically. I think the strength of a religion is when its leaders confront not just transgressions elsewhere by other religions, but most importantly within our own. That's why for me, Nostra Aetate was such a seminal moment, because it could not have been easy. I was not there, I was 16 years old. It could not have been easy. I mean, after all, if your notion of your faith is that, in a way, it is unquestionable, it is a kind of blueprint for life, then how do you reconcile that with the distortion or hijacking or kidnapping of that faith, in the name of that faith? So I think the only answer, or perhaps the immediate answer, is perhaps that's the courage. I had a taxi driver. I was in Brussels after the 2 terrorist attacks. I was there during, one at the metro station in the center of Brussels near the European Union institutions, and the other at the Brussels airport. And I was a few hundred yards away from the one downtown. And in lockdown for a number of hours, and then the city was in lockdown, and then within a day or two, we couldn't go to the airport, but we could go to the train station to get out of Brussels. And I had a taxi driver, and he was originally from Morocco, and he wanted to talk to me. Spoke in French. As I mentioned earlier, my parents spoke French at home. And he wanted to tell me, you know, monsieur, the people who did this were not Muslims. And I said, I didn't know who they were. I mean, in the early moments of these things, you know, news is coming from every direction. That they were neo-Nazis, they were this, they were that, who knows? So, tread carefully. So I said, wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. But how do you know? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, because a Muslim doesn't kill. And if a Muslim kills, he's not a Muslim. Now I thought, you know, this is just one taxi driver, this is not a great religious scholar. But I thought, you know, there's a beautiful logic to it. And it wasn't for me to argue with the taxi driver. I just absorbed what he said. But at the end of the day, I reject what he said. Because as I said, when Yigal Amir killed Yitzhak Rabin, we could not disown him by saying He violated one of the 10 Commandments, ergo he is not Jewish, ergo we have no responsibility for dealing with the consequences of what he did. We do have a responsibility. Each of our religions, and I think we have to confront them.
Absolutely, and while you have one more minute to think about your answer to the first question, I just want to add to that is that, you know, we don't have the right to call someone a non-Muslim. I mean, that's between them and God. But we do have the right and obligation to speak up. And so one of the things I want to make sure that people understand is that, you know, every terrorist act, whether it be against Americans or whether it be against Jews somewhere else, the Islamic Center and Muslim organizations throughout the country and the world have done those condemnations. And so it's very important, because one of the first things I hear from people is, why don't Muslims condemn such acts that are maybe perpetrated by people who call themselves Muslim, but their actions are un-Islamic, as the example that you gave. And the second, very quickly, is that then we also have an obligation to teach our children nonviolent ways of resolving their differences. And so Shabana is one of the founding members for Muslim Mothers Against Violence as well, is that the whole premise is that you have the right for grievances. You have the right to, you know, defend what you believe in, but there are ways that you can do that that are within the Islamic guidelines, that doesn't involve killing innocent people, that shouldn't involve harming, that can't involve harming yourself, because suicide is forbidden as well.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting. Each of our religions has as a central tenet what we all call the golden rule. It's one simple sentence. No matter how we express it, love thy neighbor as thyself, or some variation of it. It exists in Islam, it exists in Christianity, it exists in Judaism. One simple sentence. And if one stops to think about it, it's the answer to everything we've been talking about. And yet, thousands of years later, we have not been able to operationalize the sentence. We focus on other elements of practice, of other elements of faith, but at the end of the day, you know, as Rabbi Hillel said in the Jewish tradition, when asked to summarize the Torah on one foot, he famously said, love thy neighbor as thyself, all the rest is commentary. In a way, you know, that's it. That's it. So let's not lose sight of it. The most difficult thing for me over the last now 31 years was the year 2008, 2009, when very severe economic crisis hit America. AJC had to cut our staff budget by 22% because the bottom was falling in the economy. No NGO, Brueggeman University, knew where the bottom of this was going to be. And the hardest thing was having to say goodbye to people who, through no fault of their own, couldn't keep their jobs. And having to let each one of those people go, knowing that they were going into a space where there might not be another job, yet they had to pay mortgages and worry about their children. It was through no fault of their own. They had done nothing wrong. On the other hand, for the agency to survive, we had to slash our budget, as many did. And to this day, I still see the faces of each of those staff colleagues. 22% of our staff, we're about 270. So we let go of about 50, 55. And I met with each one by one. That was pretty tough. That's the part of management that is no fun. Part of management that is fun is vision. You know, visioning where you want the institution to go, and then enlisting others to support the vision, both on the team and in the fundraising community, and then being able to sort of see your vision realized one day, knowing that it's happened, it's real. But there's a painful site as well, and that was my main site.
Okay. I think it's probably time that we close. We always try to finish around 9. And before we close, just a couple of things I wanted to take the opportunity to say. One, to thank Gary Zola, the matchmaker, who indeed did play a major role in helping put this evening together. Secondly, to thank Joan Robinson, the spouse of William T. Robinson III, for helping me and the Executive Committee and Thomas Moore take the IRL to levels not even imagined by her husband, Bill. So I thank you for that, Joan. Bishop, would you come and do a closing prayer for us?
This is going to be something not very original to the folks who are here in Covington who have gotten to know me. I have a prayer that I have prayed every day since I was 12 years old. When I introduce myself to the diocese, I ask them to begin to pray it for me. And I think it's a prayer that we can all pray and might contribute to our ability to have the conversations we need in our lives. It goes like this, simply. Lord, wherever I go from here, let me be strong in faith. Let me be poor in spirit, humble, building up others. Make me a person, a man, after your own heart.
Thank you, Bishop, and we welcome you to the Diocese of Covington. And I want to mention to all of you, the next IRL program, we already have a date of February 24th. We'll get you more information as we get closer. The keynote speaker will be a professor from Notre Dame University named Dr. Patrick Deneen. And as I said, we will get other information as we move towards the end of this year and the beginning of the new year. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I thank all of you for joining us. One last